The advice provided in this podcast is general in nature. For your specific situation, you will need to get in contact with your local OT, vehicle modifier or mobility dealer and set yourself up with an assessment or a trial. Trials really do put you in the driver's seat, so get out there and get one going. Before we get started, we just want to do a quick shout out to our sponsors who make this show possible: Mobility Engineering, Driving Well, and Williams OT. This show takes time and money to put together, and we are forever grateful for their passion for our industry. Okay, enough of the business. Let's get on to the interview with Jenny and Brad.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Drive Able podcast. I'm Jenny Gribbin from Driving Well Occupational Therapy in Brisbane, and here is Brad Williams from Williams OT in Adelaide.
Hi. I'm extremely well. This is a unique episode. Unique episode because
today it's just you and I, Brad. So yep. We are going to enjoy each other's company and experiences and expertise, and hopefully share that as we're going to be unpacking a couple of different types of driving assessments. So when we first planned this episode, we were very ambitious, and we had planned to talk about truck and commercial driving assessments and motorbike assessments. And then we've got into our conversation and our recording, and we've realized this is a very long episode, so we're going to split it into two parts. So this is part A of our commercial vehicle assessments. In this episode, in part A, we're going to be talking about truck driving assessments. Brad and I both have additional training in doing heavy vehicle assessments that we have done that training, Brad back in 2013 and myself in 2018 with Beth Cheel. And we've been building our knowledge and skills in those areas since then.
Yep.
So please listen to part A with this episode on trucks, but make sure you come back for part B, because we're going to go into the motorbikes and what goes into that particular assessment, as well as modifications like trikes, which are very, very, very cool and life-changing, really. So Brad, are you ready to talk about part A, truck driving assessments?
Yeah, let's do it. Like, it's been pre-recorded, everybody. So this is the intros come after. So don't worry. This is about truck assessments, but in this one we really unpack the assessment course as well for both trucks and motorbikes. So if you're listening to the motorbike one later, we're going to unpack the assessment one. If you're listening to this one first, we unpack how NDIS and what happens with NDIS in the second one. So a bit of a catch. You maybe need to listen to both. Yeah, that's right. You might need to listen to both. So no more mucking around. Let's get into it.
Mobility Engineering is Australia's leading automotive product supplier for disability customers. We have installers all across the country, over 100 of them, and we have the largest range of mobility products for vehicles in the country. Get in touch with Mobility Engineering for any of your driving solutions.
Hi everyone, this one's a really good episode. This one's just Jenny and I. There's not a third person, there's not a third head on the Zoom meeting recording. This one is just Jenny and I, just two heads if you're watching this on YouTube. And today we are going to talk about other types of assessments. Now, before Jenny joined me on the podcast, Ali, who was doing the podcast with me back in season 1 and 2, back in episode 41, he questioned me. It was like going to court. He was drilling down on what does an OT do and what is an OT driver assessment. And in that we unpacked what is a driver assessment for car assessments. And we unpacked how the OT was the hub and lots of spokes going out, communicating with the Department of Transport, or your licensing authority in the state that you are. We unpacked that they're the link between the client and the NDIS as well, but also the link between the client and a driving instructor. So they're kind of an organizer and an assessor in one. And we unpacked that assessment process and what was involved in that. So go back and listen to episode 41 if you want to know about car assessments and a driver assessment for driving a light vehicle. But Jenny, How are you? We're going to talk about other types of assessments. What are you
We
excited
are.
about for this one?
Well, I think it'll just be fun for us to have a chat one-on-one and explain the process that goes into these other types of assessments. So we're going to be talking about motorbike assessments
Hmm.
and maybe truck assessments. So we'll see where the conversation kind of leads us, as you and I tend to do, where we've got a couple of notes, but we're pretty
Always off script. Always off
unscripted.
script.
And we actually really haven't talked about this with each other yet. So it'll be interesting to see how our practices have kind of developed, and hopefully things will align.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully. Yeah, that's right. Because the big focus is on cars because that's what
Yeah.
most people do every day. But there's a lot of motorbike riders out there, and there's a lot of truck drivers out there that are either looking to get back to truck driving or
Yeah.
maybe wanting to do truck driving as a profession, as an
Yeah.
occupation in the future. And we've got to figure out whether that's appropriate or not. So let's get into it. Let's get into
Okay.
it. What is there any training that we need to do to be
I
able to
think
do these heavy vehicle and motorbike assessments?
that's the exactly the very first thing that I think we need to make sure we talk about is the training. So as you and I know, and as a lot of our listeners know, to be an occupational therapy driver assessor, we've got to go away and do the driver assessor training.
Yep.
And that will allow us to do the driving assessments of cars, which you've touched on, and for an occupational therapy driver assessor to be able to do motorbike and truck and like commercial type vehicle assessments. It's really best practice that that therapist goes and does an additional training
Yeah.
short course.
Yeah.
So I did that training with Beth Cheel, now through the Institute of Driver Health in Sydney.
Yep.
I did that back in 2018. Went and did a 1 day
Yeah.
course at Sue Shelford at the time. What about you?
Me, I did it with Beth as well. Make sure that you go and search for Beth as well and her episodes in regards to the P Drive and also her assessment courses that she runs through the Institute of Driver Health. Um, and I did it back in 2013. Now, that was a great day. It was humid as in Sydney, and I remember it vividly because we did the training course. Now, I was really fortunate enough because I was able to drive a bus, I was able to drive a truck, I was able to drive a forklift and learn all of the language and components that go into these type of assessments. I had no idea what a dog was before doing this assessment. What do you remember about the course?
We didn't, Beth had changed the structure a bit by the time I went through my training. So it was really focused on the theoretical aspects and a lot of videos that we watched. But then we did have the opportunity in the afternoon. She had a fellow bring a trailer and demonstrate a lot of the different tie down techniques that you'd see
Mhm.
different tie downs on, like uh, tying down loads and curtains and things like
Yeah.
that,
Yep.
so that you could get a little bit of a glimpse about the functional task analysis involved in not just the driving aspect, but the associated tasks involved in these different vehicles, especially the big commercial trucks. So
Hmm.
the actual driving on, like the actual driving performance stuff, there's a lot that is the same as in a car. There are additional skills, but then it's also, you mentioned driving is a lot of people do it as a professional occupation, and that on my teams pop-ups, and that there's not just the driving aspect, but all of the other components that they often have to do as well. So we really need to consider if we're assessing, for example, an injured truck driver and they're looking at a return to work, can they manage all of those associated tasks, even something as simple as getting in and out of the vehicle?
Well,
Is it
let's
hard?
break it down. Let's break it down. Let's talk
Yeah.
about it. Let's talk about a truck assessment.
Okay.
We in our notes we had motorbike assessments, so we've
We,
already gone
yeah,
off.
we've
So
flipped the, the
we're
structure
skipping motorbikes.
already.
Don't worry, we'll come back to motorbikes because I know that there's going to be heaps of people listening who want to think about it, riding a motorbike. So don't worry, we'll come back to it. But let's unpack truck assessments while we are talking about it. Let's go into the nitty-gritties of what's the difference between a car assessment and a truck assessment? Do we have to do a car assessment first? Do they have to show us that they can drive a car first? And then where do we go to from there?
For me, my practice has kind of evolved over the years and
Hmm.
evolved with different experiences that have come about. What I used to do was often I would, if someone had already returned to C-class vehicle driving, I would start my off-road and then my on-road would be in the truck.
Hmm.
I've had a few different experiences that have actually led me to change that practice model and to make sure that we do a C-class first.
Yep. I'm
C-class
glad you said that
off-road.
because I
Yeah,
went through exactly the same thing.
yeah,
They've already got their license back. Why do we need
yeah,
to do this?
yeah.
But there's been some eye openers where you just
Mm,
go, oh, this is really showing us what we need to look out for before we get into this bigger vehicle that has got a lot more safety risk to it.
yeah.
And before we're driving a massive, big, heavy vehicle
With no
in
dual
with
controls.
no dual controls. Yeah, yeah. So some driving schools have a brake on their side, but it's a lot harder to pull up a truck than it is to pull up a car for sure. So
In
a
in
lot more blind spots
Brisbane,
too.
in Queensland, the truck schools that I work with, they don't have a dual control in any of their trucks.
Yeah,
So
right.
I definitely had clients that have gone through with no concerns at all, and they've demonstrated really great performance. But I've had other clients that have struggled and that have needed a lot of coaching from the
Yeah,
instructor, a lot of direction from the instructor. And really we need to be sure that everyone in that vehicle is going to be safe before we're, willing to
yeah,
take them out on the road. And if we can't see, like, the only way to really check their observation and reactions and planning and judgment and things in a safe way is to do
mhm,
that inside the confines of a C class with
yeah,
dual controls with the, client driving, the instructor in the front and OT in the back,
yeah,
and that there's no issues, that they're passing that without any concerns,
yeah.
and restrictions on their license before we then proceed into getting them into the on road with the truck.
Yeah, so that's a really important factor to note is if you're looking to do a truck, if you're looking to drive a truck in general, you need to start with a car license and
Yeah,
then you build up in capacity. So
I
medium
think,
rigid, heavy rigid,
yeah,
multi-combination, oh sorry,
every
heavy
combination.
combination and then
Mm.
multi-combination, which is your
Yeah,
road train type of scenario.
yeah,
And you need to go up those tiers in your training. So you learn about the extra weight and you learn
yeah,
about the extra components that go into it.
yeah.
So it's the same for an OT assessment. We need to make sure that the ground, the basics, the core
Foundations.
skills are in there, and people are doing that well before we go and step up into a truck. So it might be
I
a
think,
reduced drive in a car because it's just made it a matter
yeah.
of ticking off and making sure. But it's a really good practice to make sure that you go and do a car assessment first because there has been some eye openers. There have
Mm.
really been some eye openers if you do skip that part.
I think also for someone that's returning to truck driving, is there, like, they're a truck driver, they've had some kind of medical event, they've had time off driving, like a stroke, for example, a mild, I put that inverted commas, a mild stroke where they've had a really good recovery, but you know that graduated return to all of their driving tasks is the safest way to proceed.
Yep.
So that return to the driving a car and making sure they're safe with that, and they've got a little bit of um, practice and recency of experience under their belt with being out on the road and traffic before they then proceed to returning to the to truck driving.
So when we actually get into the truck assessment,
Mm.
How does it differ from a car assessment? So you've already reviewed them in the car.
Mm.
What's different about the truck assessment itself? What do you do that's a bit different?
Firstly, we allow 2 hours.
Hmm.
We
Yep.
allow a lot more time, particularly if we're looking at a combination vehicle where we've got those additional work tasks.
Yeah.
I
So what?
think that's,
Yeah. Go on. Keep going.
yeah. So if we talk, like I mentioned, the associated tasks before. So let's list out what
Yeah,
associated tasks.
let's do that. Yeah, because this
Yeah,
is really important to understand that
yeah.
it's not actually just getting in behind the steering wheel
Mm.
and showing that you can change the gears.
Yeah.
Okay. There's actually a lot more to it that we're looking for. And I've got a very memorable assessment that we did for um, it was LSA, which is our lifetime support authority. So post motor car accident.
Mm.
And he wanted to get into truck driving as a profession because he'd lost his ability to do his previous job, and
Mm.
sitting in a truck was thought to be a really good thing for him
Mm.
because it was sitting and hopefully not aggravating his injuries. But it was all the associated tasks
Mm.
that let him down. It's all the
The
associated tasks that let him
first
down. Yeah, let's
associated
go.
task,
Yep.
getting in and out of the cab.
Yeah. That was
Yeah.
it. We couldn't actually get into the truck.
Yeah. All over Red Rover if you can't
Yeah.
get in there
We could
safely.
not climb into the truck. And it's that
Yeah.
3 point contact that we
Yeah.
need to show for safety. So
Yeah.
one hand, 2 feet, or
Yeah.
two hands, 1 foot in
Yeah.
contact with
Yeah.
the truck at all times. No jumping out of the cabs,
Yeah.
no
Sliding
impact when
out.
you're landing, no
Yeah.
coming out front first and sliding down the steps.
Yeah.
None of those type of things. It's about pulling yourself up multiple steps. And we had to look
And
at
and these steps
different,
are
yeah,
really narrow. Like you
yeah,
only have a toe hold like width available on these steps.
quite
And
often off
they're
center.
high.
And
They're high. Like
yep.
these cabs, like you get up into a um the prime mover of a semi-trailer
Mhm.
of a like a multi-combination, heavy combination vehicle,
Yep.
you're nearly 2 meters off the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. The cab overs, so the cab over the wheel. So
Yes.
what they drive a lot in Europe, compared to what comes over from America with their engine out the front, they can have different step combinations to get up.
Mm, mm.
Sometimes you might be stepping up on the tank with a little step built onto the edge of the fuel tank. Other times you'll be stepping up around
Yep.
around the front wheel,
Mm.
and off center. So
Yes.
your legs are off to the right hand side when you're
Yep.
climbing up into the driver's seat.
With your hand holds
Off
at
off
a
to the
skew
left
angle.
side. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that twisting action, that ability to step up, it's really designed to go one step with your right leg, then one step with your left leg. Quite often, if you can't lift both legs up and raise your knees while your body weight is hanging backwards and hanging on with hands,
Yeah.
that can be really, really difficult. The other
Yeah,
thing that
that's
goes
safe
with
for
that,
your hip flexion and knee flexion to be able to get your leg
twisting.
up in that space is really, really tight. And then as that last um, left leg into the seat of the car and like
Yep.
clearing underneath between the seat and the steering wheel, getting your bum in and you're balancing with 1 foot on the edge, trying to hold on.
with
And
a
there's 2 meter
Quite
drop.
often with a moving steering wheel as well.
Yeah.
If it's an older truck without a grab rail, the steering wheel's
Yeah.
got a lot of play in it as well, so it's not as stable as
Yeah.
what you would like it to be.
Yeah.
Um,
And this climbing up and down, Brad, like the setup of getting one of these vehicles started
mm.
often requires, I don't know, four, 5 or 6 climbs up and down, even just before like the setup of the truck and going. It's a repeated high frequency task, the
if
getting
you're
up
if
and down of a cab.
if you're also involved in actually the logistics of what's in the truck, then
Mm.
you've got to do more climbing. You've
Yeah.
got to do more climbing. So quite often you've got to climb up onto the tray. If it's a
Yeah.
tray, like let's say it's a medium rigid with a curtain, you've got to climb up onto the tray to secure your loads quite
Yes.
often to make sure that the tie down goes all the way through. Sometimes it can get caught and you have to climb up and get the tie down
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
Quite often you have to climb up to put leads on for your brakes into the bit between the cab and the trailer. If it's a semi, you've got to climb
Well,
up onto
that's the
that
next
area.
the next task is coupling the trailer
Yeah,
and all those associated parts, right? So
there's lots of
I
climbing.
I I
Always.
love assessing that part. I think like I get to stand on the ground and just watch the driver do all of the work. But I think, oh, this is so cool. So yes, particularly you haven't been able to have the opportunity to be around that kind of work before, but basically they've got to get in up into the truck first to turn everything on, and they might set up their mirrors and get the aircon cranking.
Yep.
But then they'll have to reverse the prime mover back in towards the underneath the trailer.
Yep.
And then the next part is that they'll prepare the coupling. So the instructors that I work with have got a little acronym PAL. So pin, where they dock the pin in to the trailer.
Yep.
Then A for air, so they connect all the air hoses,
Yep.
which involves climbing up into that middle bit of the tray. And as to what you said, and connecting, there's three hoses that they have to
Yep.
connect.
Yep.
And then L's for legs. So they'll go and they'll wind the legs of the trailer up and secure those.
Yeah.
And then they've got to go back up into the vehicle and do a tug test to check
Yep.
that trailer is connected. So they actually pull it forward and make sure that it follows. Whilst checking all of those other things off. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that tug test is something that I didn't know about before,
Mm.
but even in reverse, the whole unhitching, the
Yeah.
taking the unlocking for the pin, the ability
Yep.
to pull
Yep.
pull the
Yep.
actual rod to
Yep.
unhook the pin, it can be quite stiff. It can
Yep.
be quite vigorous on the body, and you're doing
Yep.
it sometimes in a really awkward position, depending on
Yep.
how low the actual trailer is. Then there's the whole walk around, the
The walk
safety
around.
checks,
Yep. Yeah. The pre-drive.
right? And then if you're involved in it, if you need to do it, depending on which company you're involved in, or if you work for yourself on a farm, and that can be a massive big difference,
Mm.
actually having to do the maintenance on the truck as well. So actually pulling the bonnet off and being
Yeah.
able to lever that off. So it's actually quite physical. You might
Mhm.
not think about it when you might see a truckie at a truck stop with a bit
They're
of a big beer
strong.
belly out the
Yeah.
front. They are
Yeah.
strong, and
So strong, man.
they're quite often using that body weight to their
Yeah.
advantage to help lever these
Yeah.
big things around. And they are strong, but they quite often don't have back injuries either. But that's what the back injuries are the ones that are quite eye-opening because they can get in and out of a car at
Yeah.
ground level,
Yeah.
but get them going
That
up and down and
climbing
pulling
and
and
the
yeah.
pulling and the bending as well. Like that forward flexion where they're bending down to do all that, connecting the hoses, and they're just getting themselves in really awkward sustained positions while they're doing a force as well. So
Mhm.
even
Well,
that
yeah.
winding the legs, there's
Yeah.
like the movement that they have to do to do the winding and
Mm.
like that frequent rotation, and they're there for a while doing that task.
Yeah, and the one that really caught me out one day, even though it's on rails and so forth, is the curtain. The
Mm.
pulling of the curtain was really interesting because you're doing it at shoulder height,
Yes.
and not at hip height, which is better for your ergonomics.
Yeah.
So doing it at shoulder height and twisting your body as you're walking,
Mm.
that one there was a real injury provoking movement for the
Mm.
client that I had that had a compressed disc.
Mm.
And oh geez, the pain that caused, that going up and down in a straight line, although it was a slight twist, he could do, but the
Mm.
pulling action of the curtain he just could not do. So it was really really interesting, and that's why we have to go through all of these areas when we do a truck assessment. Have you got a memorable story? Have you got one that stands out to you?
I had a fellow with a back injury. I can't remember what level injury it was, but it was a musculoskeletal injury, and the poor guy was just in so much pain doing every single one of those
Yep.
associated tasks that we talked about. And I think, the recommendation was that, well, yeah, he could drive, but he couldn't do all, like he couldn't manage with all of the other components. And I think he was a work cover assessment.
Yep.
And I think the recommendation was that he's just really not able to return to truck driving. And I mean, our role is kind of quite contained in when we're doing these types of assessments in many cases. So I don't know what the outcome for that gentleman was, but it was potentially you know, a claim where he probably had a payout and he was probably needing to medically retire from truck driving. Yeah.
Yeah, they're hard. They're
Yeah.
really, really hard, those ones. And
Yeah.
then they're not the ones that we like doing, but they need to be done.
Yeah.
I've got two on the other side. I've got one where it was a primary producer license. So it was a young driver who was still on his Ps, but able to drive trucks because he's a primary producer living out very rural in South
Mm.
Australia. And he was only allowed to drive from the property to the silos.
Uh-huh.
And that's a license that you're able to get here in South Australia. If you're on a family farm out in the middle of nowhere, then young drivers are allowed to drive between two destinations as long as they're en route from farm to silo, or it can be packing yard, or it can be stockyard or something like that. As long as you are doing that. So that was really eye-opening. A young driver, and he blew us away. He was excellent and no issues there at all. And the other one that I have had a lot of fun with, and this one was great. This guy had his own truck, but unfortunately had an amputation of his left leg below knee, and he got back to actually proving that he could drive a truck with his prosthetic on and off the clutch.
Mm.
But he got so hot and his stump was so sweaty. So in the assessment, went really well. But over time, especially where he lived,
Yeah.
it was so hot. Like we're talking 40 degrees summer is normal. So
Yeah.
40 degrees Celsius. So way above 100 if you're listening to this in America. Really, really hot, stuffy conditions. And his stump in the sock, in the prosthetic, he just couldn't stand it. He has to take his stump off to let it air so he doesn't
Right.
get skin breakdown.
Yeah.
So even though he could prove that he could do it, he had to, we had to come up with an alternative. And we went through the process of turning his medium rigid tray top into an automatic. And that was very, very interesting. So changing the transmission to an automatic, and now he's got push button gears in the truck.
Yeah.
But also looking at the tray and all of the elements of the tray, of getting up and down, and his balance on the tray, and putting in an extra step down lower, because the first one was almost up at hip level,
Yeah.
and he
Wow.
doesn't have the ankle flexion because of the
Yeah.
prosthetic.
Yeah.
And so because the ankle flexion's not there, he couldn't get his toes up and was leaning right back to be able to get his toe up onto the steps. So
Yeah.
putting in an extra half step in between, welded in there, made a world of difference. Plus, we put a second rail on, because it was
Yeah.
only one rail on one side and the other hand was on the tray. It was all about balance for him. So putting in extra steps and extra grab rails so he could climb up onto his tray and tie down all of these things. So take the stuff.
Awesome. Simple solution. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
costly,
Lovely.
and we had to prove that was going to be beneficial for him and beneficial for his future. And he's
A
working every
change
day.
of transmission would have been.
Yeah.
I've done a change of transmission once in a car, and that was about 20 grand.
Yep. Yeah,
That was
we're talking.
a Land Cruiser, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're talking very similar amounts of money
Yeah.
for the truck. And yeah, but he hasn't looked back. It's been fantastic. Well, the other thing is that we had to go into mine sites. So
Yeah.
they've got very strict requirements for the truck, and what's allowed to be hanging off and
Yeah.
not hanging off, and heights and all those type of things.
Yeah.
So everything that we did to the truck had to meet those requirements as well. So
Mhm.
No, the extra handrails couldn't be on; they had to be removable. All those type of things as well. So that one
Mm.
there, there's a lot that went into that one, and he's driving every day. He takes his stump off, he takes his prosthetic leg off, and lets his stump breathe
Yeah,
while he's driving between.
that's
Puts it back on
fantastic.
to get out.
Great
Does all
outcome.
his tying up,
Mm.
tying down, and away he goes again, and is earning his own income and doing extremely well. It's great.
Mm. Mm.
All
I've
right,
had some really so do we want to talk about the actual driving, what we find is different with driving performance between the C class and these heavy vehicles?
let's do it. Let's do it. So, um, I remember being absolutely petrified, absolutely petrified that
Have
we
you
were.
got your truck license?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't. I feel
I
like I
do.
could. I've done enough assessments to feel like I can do it. But the
I've
road
got
rate.
my truck license. I don't know
Oh,
if you knew that. I've got my HR or
oh, well, you should talk about it then.
condition B.
What's different? What is different actually about driving the truck? So if people are wanting to explore a truck driving as an option for them, because it's yeah, let's go into it. What's different about driving a truck?
So before I went and did my course, the 1 day course with Beth Chill to get the heavy vehicle qualification as a driving OT, I did go and get my HR license just so I could really understand all of those different components and understand what they're going through. And yeah, it was a very humbling experience because I was terrified initially. I'd never driven a heavy vehicle ever. I'd never driven anything other than a car, so I was actually terrified and even going for my first. It was a course in a day program that I did, which was quite intense, and I probably wouldn't recommend that. I probably recommend that you do some training over a couple of days and then you test. It was a bit intense, but anyway, I passed on the first go, but I was initially just terrified about being in charge of a huge vehicle for one. But the very first thing I did when I got into the cab was I went to adjust my rear vision mirror, and there was no rear vision mirror.
There's no mirror. There's no mirror.
So
Yep.
that's the very first big difference is you don't have a rear vision mirror because you've got a load behind you. There's nothing behind you to
You
see.
can't
So,
see. Yep.
so your reliance on your observation purely comes to your external mirrors.
What about blind spot checks?
And so there is no blind spot checks because you're just seeing air because you're sitting up so high. So the mirrors have got the like it's a double height mirror, and the bottom part of the mirror is looking down right next to you, and that becomes your blind spot check. So you're having to relearn how to do all of your lane change techniques like mirror indicate shoulder check. You're kind
Mm.
of doing your top mirror, bottom mirror
Yep.
as your observation behind you and then right down next to you to change how you're doing that technique.
There's
Yeah,
a big difference about how long the vehicles are as well,
yeah,
and understanding where those back wheels are to be
yeah.
able to avoid things. Do you want to talk about that? How do you judge that from a car to if you go from a small car, which is a hatchback, let's say,
Mm,
you don't really often need to think about where the back wheels are. You do a little bit to make sure you don't mount curbs as you go around corners and things
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
But when you're in a truck,
yeah. So
I
there's
tow a caravan, and the
yeah,
caravan is a long way back, but trucks are even longer. So
yeah.
how do you judge that?
Well, there's change of technique with your vehicle positioning and your steering, right? As you're approaching your corners, but then there's also you're having to add in constant mirror checking,
Mhm.
constant. Like your head has got to be on a little swivel pole and you're moving your head constantly. And that's the difference between a sort of okay driver and a good driver
Yep.
in my books. So
Yep.
I have people that are checking both sides of mirrors like all the time whilst they're just driving along, particularly when they're going around a corner, around a roundabout, that they're checking that the position of their
Mhm.
trailers, and in relation to the side of the road, or the line.
Sideswiping a car,
Yeah,
sideswiping a light post,
yeah,
hitting the curbs, going up and over.
yeah.
Yeah, that is one of the big factors that we actually assess for is their ability to comprehend, especially if they've had a brain injury of some sort,
Mm,
comprehend those extra elements. They might be judging the traffic nicely out the front, but that additional processing of what's happening out the back
that's right.
can be quite eye-opening and scary. That's the one that scared me the most. And actually going down a road with parked cars,
Yeah.
I don't know how we didn't take out cars parked on the side because there was cars coming towards us and he moved away from the cars coming towards
Mm,
us, and
yeah.
how we didn't take out cars. That's the one that I remember vividly.
Mm.
It's yeah, and that was a no-go, that one, as much as he desperately wanted his license and has come back for reassessment. That one there, that is
It
that
is
is
kind of
the
judging. Yeah.
that's that judgment of extra size.
Yeah.
When you can't see it,
Even
disappears under the bonnet a lot quicker.
even that technique and getting that technique in especially if they've had poor habits and they haven't utilized that left
Hmm.
side mirror.
Yep.
I've had driving instructors that they they try and use humor to, like, not often these guys, they can't be told, right? They're old, generally generally middle-aged to older men, and don't like being told what to do, especially by a female.
Yep.
This is a barrier that I frequently experience. Um, the instructors are usually the ones that will tell them what they need to be doing, and the instructors try to use humor to kind of deflect that they're not being told what to do, but they're sort of being suggested, okay, well, you need to make some improvements and this is how you do it. So I've had instructors saying, oh, I may as well just take that, I'll just get my screwdriver and take that mirror off because you don't need it because you're not using it.
Yeah.
And then they that little bit of a joke and humor kind of makes them go, oh yeah, no, I wasn't using it, and help coach them to be using it and understand why they need to be using it. That for that, that's a really good example where they've got parked cars and they need to check that their trailer's not going to hit the parked car as they pass it. Mm.
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot that goes into the cognitive side of it all
Yeah.
and the brain processing, especially if you've got back to car, you've got used to that. We now need to look at your ability to expand onto that. There's lots of modifications that could go into it. So we just did one the other week with a spinner knob on there
Mm.
to be able to, because of a shoulder injury,
Yep.
and that was about keeping a medium rigid for her bus. So she
Mm.
could go traveling around Australia in her bus. So it was
Mm.
about understanding automatic bus, about steering and putting indicators on with a right shoulder injury. So that was good fun. But there's a lot that goes into a truck assessment. But I
One of the
really wanted,
other,
yeah,
oh, I'll just say one of the other things that I often see is often a make or break is that ability to you're sitting so much higher in a truck that you can see a lot further ahead. And the good drivers are the ones that do look ahead and they plan far ahead, and
yeah,
they're used to this term of margins with the truck. So we often call it a buffer zone, or that safe following distance. Margin tends to be the term that they really understand.
yeah.
And the drivers that really plan ahead and give that really lovely long margin
Hmm.
do really well. The ones that just can't be consistent with that margin.
Yeah.
I had a gentleman last week that his margins were just not there, and we're doing lane changes, and he's come up and done a lane change right behind a car,
Yeah.
and if that car braked, we
Yeah.
would have been inside the car. Like,
Yeah, but I can see over the top of that car. There's nothing happening. Yeah, we've heard it all before. We
mm,
need to demonstrate the safety elements first,
yeah, yeah,
and demonstrate that, and the gap selection as well. You've got to get a lot more weight up to
yes,
speed, and it
yeah.
takes time to do that. So those
And
gap
time to slow
selections.
down, just
Yeah,
to break as well.
yeah,
Have you had many clients where they've been trying to return to driving and they have not been successful?
yeah,
Or
yeah. I've had
have
I've had a
great
few.
experiences? Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a few. I've had the one memorable one is a gentleman that actually got past by another company that we don't use. And we were asked to review because someone was concerned about his cognition, and we had to assess that he wasn't safe to drive a truck, and the anger that went with that was horrific. And that was a really tough day. And unfortunately, that's the gentleman I was talking to about before. That second, he came back for a second opinion to see if things had changed, and our opinion hadn't changed. So there's a lot of anger towards us for taking away his license, but the person that made the referral was absolutely spot on, and we're not sure how he got through that first bit, which is really unfortunate, and for him. Yeah, but we couldn't.
Do you remember what the reason for the cognitive decline
Yeah,
was?
so it's actually an intellectual disability where it slowed cognition right from this, from birth. And yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, it was an intellectual disability, and it just didn't have the capacity to do that extra level of thinking and requirements for adjusting from car to truck. We'd recommended lessons to see how we can see if there was a chance that he could do it, but that's been declined from funding. So that's a really difficult situation, that one. And another one with the pain and trying to get the pain under control. That was a real eye opener as well. So not everyone's successful, and same with cars. Not everyone's successful with cars and returning to car driving either, and we need to look at alternatives.
Williams Occupational Therapy focused their attention on helping people with their mobility needs. From driving to wheelchairs, Williams OT provides help to get people mobile.
All right, everybody. Thanks very much to our sponsors. Jenny and I have dug deep. And
we've gone too deep, Brad.
Gone too deep into the truck assessments, and we've run out of time. So we're going to do a part B for the motorbike assessments, and we'll unpack in that one. A bit of a hook for you is we will talk about how NDIS interacts with both truck assessments and motorbike assessments. So if you're thinking about truck assessments and you want to understand how it impacts on how NDIS is utilized in this space, make sure you hang around for that one. So sorry guys, you're going to have to stick around and get into part B just around the corner.
Driving Well Occupational Therapy loves working with people of all ages and with all kinds of medical conditions to safely give them the opportunity to explore their driving goals. As we wind up this episode, please remember that the advice provided in this podcast is general in nature. For your specific situation, you will need to get in contact with your local OT, vehicle modifier or mobility dealer and set yourself up with an assessment or trial. Trials really do put you in that driver's seat.
If you like what you've heard, make sure you like, rate and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference. If you or anyone you know would like to share a story about driving with a disability, or you would like to get in contact, find the show notes, or find the resources mentioned in this episode, you can find us on Facebook. Just search @DriveAblePodcast for more information.